But adults live a little longer today than they did in 1900. 7 years if you're 65 years old on average, 2 years if you're 85. So if life expectancy went up 31 years, but adults are only living a little bit longer, where's the difference? Where's the 24-year difference? How could life expectancy go to be 31, but adults are only living a little bit longer? Infant mortality, exactly. We used to kill 160 babies per thousand through dehydration, essentially waterborne illnesses. Now, because of improved public health and hygiene, only 6 babies per thousand die in infancy. So for every child that doesn't die in infancy, that manages to live to adulthood, it shifts the curve to the right. And in fact, of this increase in life expectancy, 31 years, 24 of it's entirely due to a reduction in infant and childhood mortality. The 7-year increase is everything else, medicine included, combined. So if you think that the miracles of modern medicine are going to give you a long, healthy life as an adult, you're deluded. The reality is you have a much better chance of reaching adulthood today. The actual life expectancy means little. All it means is we're dying of different things today. It used to be infectious disease wiped out people, and that was mostly, again, waterborne illnesses. This has nothing to do with the diminution of infectious disease, has little to do with antibiotics per se. It has much to do with improved public health. Now we have a lot of heart disease and cancer and disease of dietary excess. People think if we just spend enough money on healthcare, then everybody would be healthy. But we spend 2.5 times as much money as people in the OECD, but we don't live longer and we don't live better. Our life expectancy is lower, not higher. And our healthy life expectancy, the amount of years you live fully functional, is lower. And it's actually healthy life expectancy that most people are concerned about. They're not so much worried about. They know they're going to die at some point. They want to live until they die. They don't want to spend the last years or decades of their life unable to talk or move, lying in some nursing home bed, waiting for people to come and change their diaper. They want to be able to live fully functional, autonomous, independent. And that's really what the promise of healthful living is. Not that you're going to live forever, you won't. But you can live until you die. You can dramatically reduce the likelihood of debility as a consequence of avoiding the disease of dietary excess. So life expectancy is 78, but healthy life expectancy is 69. That means that people on average are spending 9.4 years debilitated. And in these years of debility is where most of the money on healthcare is being spent. And it has little to do with reducing all-cause mortality. The bypass procedures don't make people on average live longer. The expensive, aggressive oncology treatments are, in general, particularly the breast, prostate, lung, and colon, are not shown to reduce all-cause mortality. So they're very lucrative, but they're not necessarily effective. Of the 109 billion modern humans that have been born on the planet, and of the 7.5 or 6 billion that are alive today, there have only been 5 individuals that have been well documented to live past 117. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means, and one of those is currently highly questionable. So basically what that means is your chances of living beyond 117, no matter what you do, right now are about 1 in 20 billion. So the odds are better you're going to live less than 117. The question is, how well are you going to live in the limited time you have left? Except for one young man in this room, everybody in this room is likely dead within the next 600 to 700 months. Dr. Lau says I'm supposed to be more upbeat. So the good news is you got up to 600 or 700 more months to live. Okay? And the question is, how well are you going to live in the limited time that you have available? We spend our money on the leading causes of death. That is heart disease, cancer, and stroke. I believe that's a mistake. Because we're not spending money on the actual causes of death, the reason people get heart disease, cancer, and stroke. And that's tobacco, alcohol, and an animal-based, highly processed food diet. If we spent more of our focus on getting rid of the actual causes of disease, we wouldn't have to deal with the leading causes of death, disability as much. Tobacco is number 1 on our list. It's the single most effective way of causing yourself to have premature death and disability. It will reduce life expectancy about 8.4 years if you're a smoker, because it affects almost every organ system in the body. And yet, 80% of smokers will never get lung cancer. You could almost argue that smoking protects against lung cancer. Because 80% of smokers never get lung cancer because they die of heart disease before they live long enough to grow their tumors. If you could make smoking more toxic so everybody died of heart disease, I imagine you could advertise your cigarettes as cancer safe. Alcohol is only, tobacco and alcohol right up here, as is blood pressure. Elevated blood pressures, major contributing cause of death and disability, but 40% of people over 25 years old in the United States have high blood pressure. And the majority of people that are over 65 have high blood pressure. So if you don't have hypertension by the time you reach 65, you're actually abnormal. So you don't want to be normal, you want to be healthy. Cholesterol, being fat, not eating fruits and vegetables, not exercising, taking illicit drugs, or engaging in unsafe sexual behaviors. Those are the reasons people die. That's the ultimate causes of death. None of those are deficiencies of pills, potions, powders, treatments, surgeries, or other things. What is killing people is something called metabolic syndrome, which is a combination of abdominal obesity, elevated lipids, high blood pressure, and high blood sugars. That's what's going to kill almost all the people you know, some combination of metabolic syndrome. And we are getting fatter. In the 1980s, mid-80s, when I started practice, there wasn't a single state in the United States with obesity saturation over 14%. Obesity being at least 30 pounds overweight and a 5'4" structure. Not one state had over 14% saturation. But 10 years later, all the states were over, and some of these states here in the South were now over 20%. And then a few years later, obesity was spreading in an epidemic fashion. And finally, by 2001, here in the home of deep fried ice cream in Mississippi, we got to 25% saturation. So 1 in 4 people had achieved the exalted state of obesity. Now, they didn't want to be outdone, so the neighboring states came along and they had to come up with a new color. Now we're over 30% obesity by 2010, and it's continued to increase every year. In fact, this chart from the Center for Disease Control was absolute proof positive that the people at the CDC were optimists, true optimists. Because although nobody had quite made the breakthrough to 35% obesity saturation, they put it on the legend. They were so confident in the power of the American people. And sure enough, 1 year later, they were right. Back here in the home of Mississippi, and also in West Virginia, they managed to achieve 35% obesity saturation. They were so proud. They knew that if spring came late, they'd survive. And of course, it's increased every year since then. Every minute of every day, this epidemic is continuing to increase. I haven't noticed them put the 40% logo on, but I'm sure it's not far behind. It's not just the United States. Worldwide obesity and overweight are increasing as we export our wonderful habits. But I'm proud to say, as an American, when it comes to achieving obesity, we're #1. We've done a better job than, look at these people here in Asia, 3% obesity. It's like they're not even trying. So we're getting fatter, but we're also getting sicker. The increased incidence of conditions like diabetes is increasing geometrically. You've gone from 4% obesity in children to about 16%. They say by 2050 the majority of people will be diabetic. You'll be abnormal if you're not diabetic. The obesity epidemic and the diabetes epidemic have a correlation coefficient of almost 1.0. And what that means statistically, it means there might be a connection. So what we're doing about it as a society is telling people they should eat health food. Health food, olive oil, red wine, dark chocolate, coconut, the dead Dr. Atkins diet, may his filet of soul rest in peace, the keto, paleo nonsense. What we should do, in my opinion, is get people to eat healthy foods, fresh fruits and vegetables, grains and beans, nuts and seed, a whole plant food, SOS-free diet. SOS, of course, is the international symbol of danger, and it also stands for the chemicals added to food, including salt, oil, and sugar.
What's the WPF?
Whole plant foods.
Right, yeah.
So, real foods like fruits and vegetables, whole plant food, SOS-free diet. In the world of our ancient ancestors, you remember something, that of the modern humans, we talked about 103 billion modern humans, most of those never lived to reproduce. Most of those die in infancy, in childhood, or from starvation or predation. Only a few, a small percentage, lived to pass on their genes. Your ancestors were the winners. The ones that didn't make it were the losers. You don't have any loser relatives. Because if your parents had not been winners, you wouldn't be here, would you? And if your grandparents had not been winners, your parents wouldn't have been here, therefore you wouldn't have been here. And if your great-grandparents, and your great-great, and your great-great, 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 great, for 1,000 generations, if anyone of your ancestral tree had failed, you couldn't be here. You're the end result, the piece de resistance of this long chain of successful sexual reproduction that culminated in you. And you have in you the characteristics of those winners, not the losers that never passed on the DNA. A million years ago, we know that modern style humans were using, actually before modern humans, but we were using tools. We've used fire for about 5, 6, maybe 700,000 years for light, heat protection, and to process our foods. And the most powerful tool that's ever been discovered, the most powerful force, is language. And that shows up around 100,000 years ago. And our brains are particularly well suited to adapting the sophisticated use of language, which allows you to accumulate information and pass it on in a geometric fashion. So something that might take somebody a whole lifetime to figure out by trial and error, you can now pass on in a few minutes with the power of language. In 70,000 years ago, modern human population dropped below 10,000 after there was this big Indonesian volcano, and it disrupted the environment and caused environmental changes. And as a consequence, the number of humans starved out to where there was less than 10,000 modern humans on the planet. That's the level where extinction becomes a very real possibility. Somehow we survived. Back then, there were no politicians telling us that global warming was a hoax. At that time, it was real, caused major problems, and maybe once again we should be concerned. Okay, this is the modern human brain. This is the brain of a human being, presumably from 100,000 years ago, about the time language became dominant. You'll notice they're identical. Identical.
Where did they find that brain?
This is postulated from anthropology, looking at the cranial vaults. So they're postulating that in the last little tiny blip of biological time, which is about what 100,000 years is, there hasn't been enough time to see significant change. If you go back, for example here, if you go back 3 million years ago, or 5 million years ago, or even age habilis, human brain size was tiny, okay, much like chimps today. So, and then the brain gets bigger and bigger. Human size hasn't changed much. The size of humans more or less been consistent for the last 2.4 million years. But the brain size peaked out about 100,000 years ago. This is about the time that we're sharing the planet with Neanderthals. You know, they bit the dust, we didn't, nobody knows exactly why. Bottom line is, about this time, 100,000 years ago, you could not tell the difference between you today and a human from this point. Back here, it was obvious, big differences, okay? Here, no differences. That's important because it means the brain in your head, this brain in your head, is essentially the same brain that was in human heads 100,000 years ago. And it was the brain in the humans that survived, the winners, that had certain characteristics that allowed them to survive in this environment of scarcity. In the environment of scarcity, most people didn't make it, a few people did. The ones that did weren't necessarily the polite ones. They did, you know, if you ever seen dogs that are hungry and you put a little bit of food down, there's a few dogs, do they just get in line and take their turn? Oh no, you first. Oh, let's share equally. Or do they just, you know, the bigger and stronger tend to get what they want? Well, if you took a baby from today and you transported it back to 100,000 years ago, they would not be able to tell the difference. That baby would be raised the same. If you took a baby from 100,000 years ago and brought it into the environment today, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference because that brain is essentially the same. But that brain was designed for this environment. Your brain, in your body today, was designed for this environment. To get enough to eat and not get eaten in this environment. This is what you would likely have eaten. That's what humans ate. But now we live in this environment. This is a very different environment. Only come about the last few hundred years, really. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've changed the planet. We've made these massive changes. But your brain has not changed. Your brain's the same brain that was designed so well for that environment of scarcity. But now you live in an environment where your food, amongst other things, have been changed. This is how food is processed, and this is what food looks like today. Now I want you to look carefully. Can you tell that there's a difference between this and this? A little bit of difference. That. Do you think that little bit of difference might result in potential problems? Yeah. In fact, the way the brain works is the brain gets the body to engage in behaviors that favor survival and reproduction. It reinforces behaviors that favor survival and reproduction. But remember, it was designed, it evolved in an environment of scarcity. So it's perfectly designed to reinforce your behaviors in a natural setting so that you do things that will allow you to get enough to eat, not get eaten, and hopefully live long enough to sexually reproduce and pass on your genes again. And the way the brain does that is it secretes chemicals. We'll just talk about one of them, dopamine, which reinforce behaviors that favor survival and reproduction. Dopamine is the chemical associated with pleasure. The more dopamine, the more pleasure. So what are the two behaviors that our ancestors had to engage in order to get enough to eat and reproduce? Food and sex. And it's not coincidental that the only natural, normal stimulants of dopamine are eating and sexual behavior. Food and sex, food and sex, food and sex. Unless you're a male human, then it's entirely different.
Yeah. That's really funny.
But whether it's food and sex or sex and food, the idea is that these are the normal, natural stimulants of dopamine production. Food tastes good because food results in dopamine secretion in the brain. Sex feels good because it results in dopamine secretion in the brain. The more dopamine, better food tastes, the better things feel. Now, does that make sense? What if food-feeding behavior wasn't reinforced with something like dopamine? Would people always remember to get enough to eat? Or maybe they'd skip a few meals. They wouldn't want to go through all that chalking and climbing and hunting. And so it had to be pretty heavily reinforced to make sure people kept doing it every day, long enough, consistent enough. And the same thing with sexual behavior. Do you think that if sex wasn't heavily reinforced, people would go through all that huffing and puffing and sweating? And I don't think so, especially not as consistent as you have to do it to actually be successful with babies. So these behaviors naturally reinforced, and this system worked really well. It's not, obviously, it's not just humans. It's every animal on this planet has this same pattern. The feeding behavior, sexual behavior, reinforced with dopamine production. That's how it works. And that system worked perfectly, except that humans, being the innovative creatures that we are, discovered there was a way to short-circuit the system. There were certain chemicals that if you introduce into the system, artificially stimulate that dopamine production and feel good or taste good. And so what we've done is spend inordinate amounts of effort discovering every single chemical that short-circuits the system, and then using them as much as we can. Alcohol is an example. Alcohol stimulates dopamine production. People like the way it makes them feel. The problem is it's an artificial stimulation of dopamine and can result in an addiction. Where you literally become, you have to keep taking the substance in order not only to feel good, but to avoid feeling very bad, which is the hallmark of addiction or withdrawal. And so because it's an artificial dopamine stimulation, it can result in serious problems. There's methamphetamines, there's materials that you can inject directly into your vessels, there's stuff like cocaine. Cocaine is perhaps one of the more powerful artificial stimulants of dopamine production. In fact, if they canalize the rats of the brain and give it access to cocaine, when it presses the little light, it'll press the light till it's dead. It won't stop for anything. If you quantify how much dopamine production you get if you have like an orgasm during sex versus smoking cocaine, there's actually 10 times more dopamine secretion smoking cocaine than having an orgasm during sex. So I'm giving this talk in LA, this is like 20, 25 years ago. And this older woman, maybe in her mid-80s, I don't know, she stood up, she said, "Excuse me, Dr. Goldhamer, where do we get cocaine from?" That's not the point. And if that was the only point, we could just say, okay, drugs are bad, just say no, and that would be the end of the story, right? The problem is, it's not just drugs. There are also certain chemicals, for example, that can be added to the feed of animals that will artificially stimulate dopamine production. That same dopamine that comes from your cocaine and your methamphetamines in the brains. And if, for example, if you add these chemicals into the feed of animals like mice, you give this mice all it wants to eat of its normal chow, and you give this the same chow, but you put these chemicals in the feed, this rat, this rat will increase its weight 49% in just 60 days. Now, did the rats get fat because of psychological reasons? Did this rat get fat because he had stress? Or mommy didn't love him enough? Or daddy loved him too much? Or did he get stressed for biological reasons, because we artificially stimulated the dopamine production in his little rat brain, and so he ate more of that chow? Yeah, it's biological. Birds, if you do this with birds, they'll get so fat they can't even fly. Okay? It works in all animals. If you put these chemicals in their feed, they get fat. There are no obese animals in the natural setting. Even whales. You think of whales as being fat. They're not fat. They're 90% body fat. They have it on the outside of their body, but the point is they're very muscular structure. There's no obesity without the pleasure trap. What's one of the chemicals that we can add to rats to make them fat? C6H12O6. Sugar. You all seen this stuff. It doesn't appear in this kind of concentrated form in nature, but you can process it. And we have a particular nasty version called high fructose corn syrup, which is federally subsidized version of sugar, which they make really cheap, and they put it in soda pop and fast food to make it really cheap and readily available. And we've increased the use of high fructose corn syrup over 1,000% since 1986. Remember my obesity curve? What happened around the mid-1980s? Obesity began to take off. And that correlates, at least in part, with the increased use to the point where now we've increased from 30 pounds a year of sugar to almost 150 pounds a year per person of this chemical that's added to food. I mean, you think of it as food. It's not food. It's a chemical, highly fractionated food byproduct that's added to food. And if the average person is eating 150 pounds and I didn't eat any, who's eating my share? Somebody. Okay, so another chemical that we can add to the food is this one. Do you all recognize this from biochemistry class? CH3, CH2, 7CH, CH, CH2, 7OOH. That is what? Oil. Including olive oil, organically grown olive oil, any oil, 7 calories per gram. And of course, what's even worse with oil is we take it and we heat it up at high temperature, and then we put the potatoes in there and soak up like a sponge, and we make French fries and potato chips. I tell patients, if you really want to eat fried foods, instead of eating those foods, just find the deep fryer and stick your head in it and suck. Because that's what you're doing when you're eating those fried foods, including your crackers and cookies and all your foods cooked with oil. And it's affecting all of us, including our children. Our children keep getting fatter and fatter and sicker. 93% of all the calories consumed in the United States come from either meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, sulfur, sugar. So either animal foods or highly processed pleasure trap chemicals. 93% of calories. So it's not any mystery why obesity is increasing geometrically and metabolic syndrome is becoming a dominant epidemic. It's because we're fooling the brains of the modern humans with chemicals added to our feed. It works in mice, it works in rats, it works in all animals, including it works in humans. It's called the pleasure trap, the hidden force that undermines health and happiness. Why are people fat? Because of the pleasure trap. Why are people sick? Largely because of the pleasure trap. This is the hidden force that undermines health and happiness. This is what's undermining the epidemic of obesity and diabetes and high blood pressure, autoimmune diseases, and cancers, including lymphoma. The way it works in food is really simple. It's based on caloric density. The higher the caloric density, the higher the dopamine secretion. Why would your brain be designed as essentially a calorie detection device? Remember, in the world of ancient ancestors, scarcity, get enough to eat, don't get eaten. Most people didn't do it. People that liked salad didn't make it. The people that liked higher caloric density, that could tell the difference between the valuable foods, had a better chance of getting enough to eat and not getting eaten. You're designed to get the most dense caloric foods available and eat as much as you can, whenever you can. And store whatever fat you can possibly store. Because in the natural world, the struggle is always just trying to get enough to eat. Your brain was designed for that world, not this world. This world of dietary excess, you're not designed for that. And that's why we get into trouble. Because our natural instincts don't help us eat foods that we're not designed to eat. It fools our society, just like it fools the rat and the mouse and everybody else. Salad has 100 calories a pound. How many pounds of salad would you have to eat to survive on? You need about 2,000 calories a day. 20 pounds. Can you eat 20 pounds of salad? 1 pound of salad is one of our huge, like you see some of our staff eat those big giant bowls piled up, that's a pound. 20 of those a day. If you started at 6 a.m. and you didn't stop eating till midnight, could you get 20 pounds in? Couldn't do it. And your brain knows that, and your brain's not stupid. And so your brain says, oh, salad, okay, fine, whatever, I'll eat some salad until the real food comes along. It's not getting excited about it, because it knows, even though it might be highly nutritious, you are not going to survive on salad. So what about fruit? Fruit has 300 calories a pound. What tastes better, fruit or salad?
Fruit.
Why?
It's sweeter.
It's sweeter, therefore it has a higher caloric density, therefore it results in more
Dopamine.
stimulation, exactly. 3 times the dopamine stimulation, your brain says, oh, fruit, yeah, this is all right. Now you'd still need to eat almost 7 pounds a day to survive, but at least you could do it. You couldn't eat the 20 pounds a day. So as far as your brain's concerned, like this is a loser activity right now. We gotta go find some, the fruit, okay, God, we're gonna have to work a lot to do it, but we could at least survive. On the other hand, potatoes, rice, and beans, 500 calories a pound. Potatoes, rice, beans, 500 calories. What do you think you want to eat if you're really hungry? Salad or potatoes, rice, and beans? Yeah, because your brain knows that's only 4 pounds of that to survive. So your brain is going to reinforce you more by stimulating more dopamine when you eat the richer food. What if we invented a food, of course it doesn't exist, but what if we invented a food that had 1,200 calories a pound? Do you think people would like it? Because it would result in all kinds of dopamine. It would taste good, wouldn't it? 1,200 calories a pound, more dopamine stimulation. What if we introduced this artificial food at the World's Fair in the 1800s? Would people go like nuts over it? And what if we called the food, I don't know, ice cream? Is this natural? Do you ever fall into the ice cream pond when you're out hiking? No, this is tricky. You have to manufacture it. In fact, this, when you warm this up to room temperature, it's described as sickly sweet. It's so sweet it makes you kind of sick. Well, how come it could, when it's cold, it tastes so good? And when you warm it up, it tastes sickly sweet? Does it change sugar concentration? No, it's the same amount of sugar. But when it's really cold like this, you can't tell. Because the natural taste mechanisms are not designed for this artificially manufactured food. So in order to make ice cream taste good, you have to what's called super-saturate it with sugar. When you warm it up, where you can actually taste what's there, it makes you sick. It makes you just as sick when it's cold. You just don't know it because you're bypassing your normal detection mechanisms. What if we introduced a food with a higher caloric density than ice cream, if you can imagine that? Would people like it? Yeah, and what if would they call it the staff of life? Because bread, crusty on the outside, hot on the inside, 1,500 calories a pound. That's before you turn it in a butter boat by melting coagulated cow pus all over it. 1,500 calories a pound, higher than ice cream. Have you ever been in a restaurant and they actually put this on the table? It's all like hot and steamy, and you smell it, and your brain goes, oh, baby. And you eat your, you're eating the bread, aren't you? And what do you notice about the bread in the basket on your table after a little while? It's gone. The bread's all gone. And so what do? You open up that, you've got to open up that napkin, push that naked empty basket of bread right to the edge of the table so nobody can miss it walking by, and you wait, and you wait. Finally, the waiter comes along and looks at your empty naked basket and says, oh, did you want some more bread? Now, of course, the first thing you do is pretend like you didn't know it was empty. You just go over there casually like, oh, sure, why not? But what you're thinking is, does this guy want a tip or not? And they bring you some more bread. You might even have some more, right? Do you ever go into the same restaurant and say, excuse me, waiter, hey, please bring me 3 large baked potatoes because I want to eat those before I order my dinner? Do you ever order and eat 3 large baked potatoes before you, why don't you eat 3 large baked potatoes before you order your dinner? Because you'd be too full. Because you know that if you ate 3 large baked potatoes, that volume of potato will fill the human stomach completely full. There'd be no room left for greasy, fatty, slimy, processed stuff. You'd be completely full. That's 500 calories of potato. But bread, only 500 calories will only take 1/3 of the stuff. Because it's a highly processed fractionated food, 1,500 calories a pound compared to 500 calories a pound for potato. So what do you think it's easier to get fat on? Eating bread or eating potato? Yeah, much. And that's, again, before you pour coagulated cow pus over there, increase the caloric density another 1,000 calories a pound. Do you ever go into that restaurant? Well, pure sugar is 1,800 calories a pound. I want you to think about that. So pure sugar is 1,800 calories a pound. Bread is 1,500 calories a pound. It's almost like eating sugar, as far as caloric density is concerned. Have you ever been in a restaurant and they have the sugar on the table in little packets, and it's free? It's so cheap they don't even charge you for it. So of course you go in and take 11 packages of sugar and just, right? No? Why not? It's free. No, because it's disgusting. Okay. Have you ever had one of those? This is the old style where they used to put it in a 12-ounce bottle, where they used to use Coke in Coca-Cola, but then they got a better drug. It's called caffeine. It's actually a little bit more addictive in some ways. So, little caffeine, a little bit of coloring, and a whole bunch of sugar. They used to put 11 teaspoons in a bottle. Then they figured out with a little more phosphoric acid, they could put a 12th teaspoon in before it would come out of solution. Because it used to start coming out of solution, people would object. They'd say, oh my God, they're putting sugar in this stuff. So you've had one of those. This used to be a special treat, right, for a kid? Not anymore. Now you got the big gulp, the super gulp, the double gulp, and the express gulp with free refills. And I swear, pretty soon you're going to need a bucket. That's where we're going. I think in the future, chiropractors' main source of business is going to be people going to the 7-Eleven and getting a Coke. Wait, where'd it go? There. That's where we're going. The super big gulp. Okay, 25% of calories today of teenagers come from the sugar and soda pop alone. Just not sugar, just the sugar and soda pop. Up to a quarter of their calories. We don't know why all the kids are getting fat and sick and developing diabetes, so it's a complete mystery. Chocolate has 2,500 calories a pound. What tastes better, chocolate or salad? That's maybe cultural.
Salad.
So if I took 100 people, blindfolded them, a mouthful of salad and a mouthful of chocolate, you think they could tell the difference? Yeah, 2,500 calories a pound. Some of you just looking at this, you're already noticing you're salivating. It's starting to trigger mechanisms. So they did a, what I tell patients is if you really want chocolate, there's a different way you can use it where it won't cause you the same harm. And that's what you do is you melt it down first, and then rub it all over your belly and hips where it's going to end up. And then when you're done, you wash it off and don't carry it around all week. There was actually a survey of women, not men, just women. They asked women, what would you rather do, have mad, hot, passionate sex or eat chocolate? The two most common responses. What kind of chocolate and how many pieces are we talking about? Potatoes taste good, but the commercial that said potato chips taste great, they weren't kidding. Potatoes have 500 calories a pound, potato chips 2,500 calories a pound. What do you think results in more dopamine stimulation? Yeah. Gotcha. And then if you salt them up, salt is also really important to becoming obese because it stimulates what's called passive overeating. If you eat your fill of any food till your body would naturally shut off, and then you take the same food on a different day, everything else being equal, but salt it up, you'll eat more because it stimulates what's called passive overeating. People say, oh yeah, it's going to taste better. Well, it tastes better because it stimulates dopamine production in your brain. That's what tasting better is. That's why they make the dessert so hyper-concentrated with chocolate and stuff. Because after you shoved all that greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh into your body and you're full as you can be, the only way to stimulate you to continue to eat more and activate those cramp circuits is to make the food even more stimulating, which is thus desserts. Notice subliminal teaching methods. Healthy foods, caloric density, unhealthy foods, culminating in pure oil. 93% of all calories. Now, some of you look at this because you're vegans and you say, well, there's still 7%. Let's keep hope alive. The problem is of that 7% that's coming from fruits and vegetables, a third of it's one vegetable called potatoes that are served almost exclusively as French fries and potato chips. The truth is that fruits and vegetables no longer make a statistically significant percentage of the diet of people eating in industrialized countries. They're the decoration on the plate. We're in really deep trouble. And even if we made a concerted effort to turn it around today, there is a whole lost generation that's going to suffer and die as a consequence of diabetes and these diseases of dietary excess. And they can argue about one-payer systems, Medicare for all, two-payer, six-payer, five. It ain't going to matter. You will crush any system under the cost associated with managing a generation of diabetics and the inordinate cost and debility that's going to come from it. It's going to be a huge, increasingly difficult challenge. It's called The Pleasure Trap. How many people have actually read or listened to this book? Yeah. So if you haven't, you want to either get it and read it or get AJ's excellent audio version of it and listen to it. If you have somebody that you know that needs to read it but they don't want to read, take them on a road trip, but just carry these in the car, and then they have to listen to the book. It only takes about 4 hours. It's a disturbing book that tells you what you need to know, not what you want to hear. Health Promoting Cookbook, the Bravo Cookbook, the Bravo Express Cookbook, and now AJ's book and Kathy's books, Straight Up Cooking, are all vegan, SOS free. So now we have recipes. You can make food that's free of salt, oil, and sugar, still tastes good, but not going to fool you into trouble. And now we have two companies, Mama Says and Leafside, that have SOS-free options available. Leafside, everything they make is available SOS-free. Mama Says has a special TrueNorth package. And I have just got off the phone today with a third company. Leafside makes it and freeze-dries it so you can carry it and travel with it and take it on the plane. It lasts for 4 months, very convenient. Mama Says it's ready to heat and eat, delicious. You either eat it or freeze it. This third company actually makes the food, freezes it, and ships it, so it's somewhat less expensive. They're also agreed to come out with they have a SOS-free option line available. So now there's actually going to be a third company available. And what's good about all three of these companies is they donate a percentage to the TrueNorth Health Foundation research. If you enter and they know you're coming from TrueNorth by going on the landing page, they will donate forever 10% to the foundation, which is great. And we have 700 people that have done that, and so it's helping finance our education and research efforts. So
do you know the third company name?
Yeah, I'm going to release it.
Okay.
We'll send you an email, and we'll have these cards printed up for them. I can't do it until we sign a contract. But
sure.
Yeah, we will do it. Okay, so let's see. Also, there's one while I'm doing advertising. Amazon. Y'all heard of Amazon? Right, you buy things online. If you select us as your public charity, they will donate 0.5% of everything you ever buy or spend to the TrueNorth Health Foundation. It doesn't cost you anything. You enter it one time through smile.amazon.com. Select TrueNorth, one word, TrueNorth, TrueNorth. Select it once. They will remember that, and they'll even acknowledge you every time you buy something. Oh, you're supporting the TrueNorth Health Foundation, which is good. If you have any trouble with that, the staff, the concierge can do that for you.
Even if you've already been using it?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If you can change any time. There's like 300 charities that recognize we happen to be one of them. If you go on there and select us though as your charity, they will make that, and they'll remember that, and every time you buy it, they'll automatically do it. It's really good. You just have to enter Amazon through smile.amazon.com, and they'll even remind you once you get set up if you forget to enter that way. And so we have about 800 people that have selected us as their charity, so that's become a good source of help too. Okay, so advertisements. Let's see. Now what I want to do, let's see if there was anything else I forgot. No, we don't need any of this. Okay.